I was old enough to know when something was wrong, but still young enough to believe I might survive it if I stayed quiet. That's the worst age to be. People like to say fear fades with time, but that's not true. Fear just gets sharper. It learns how to wait. It learns exactly where to sit in your memory so that years later, when the house is quiet and you're alone again, it knows how to wake you up. I'm an adult now. I have my own place. I lock my doors without thinking about it. I check my windows every night. I don't watch scary movies anymore, not because I'm afraid of monsters or ghosts, but because I learned very early that the scariest things don't need soundtracks. They don't jump out. They don't announce themselves. They just walk in. The first time it happened, I was 12 years old. My parents trusted my brother to watch me for the night. He was 18, old enough to know better, old enough to lie convincingly, old enough to believe nothing bad ever really happens. I remember the way the house felt when they left. Too big. Too quiet. Like it was waiting for something. My brother promised he'd be back in a few hours. I promised I wouldn't tell anyone he was leaving. At the time, it felt like a fair deal. Freedom in exchange for silence. I didn't understand yet that silence is often what dangerous people count on. I watched a movie I was too young for. I don't remember the title. I remember the noises. The sudden music spikes. The way every sound made me turn my head, checking the staircase behind the couch, convinced someone would be standing there when I looked. The house started making its own noises after a while. The kind houses only make when you're alone. Floorboards popping. The fridge clicking on. Wind brushing against windows like fingers testing the glass. I turned the TV off and ran upstairs. I didn't walk. I ran, the way kids do when they're trying to outrun the feeling that something is right behind them, even though they know it isn't. I brushed my teeth too fast, staring at my reflection like it might change if I looked away. Then I hid in my room, trying to distract myself with video games until the fear dulled enough to sleep. Hours passed. Or minutes. Time gets strange when you're trying not to listen. Then I felt it. The vibration. The front door closing. I remember smiling in the dark, relief washing over me. My brother was home. Everything was fine. I lay there listening, expecting his footsteps to head straight upstairs like always. They didn't. They moved. And then I realized something that made my stomach feel hollow. My brother's car wasn't in the driveway. I got out of bed and went to the window, hoping I was wrong. Hoping I'd see headlights or the familiar outline of his beat-up car parked crooked like always. There was nothing. That's when fear stopped being a feeling and became a decision. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a way to call anyone without leaving my room. I checked my door, even though I already knew the lock meant nothing. It could be opened from the other side with a fingernail. I remember thinking, very clearly, that if someone wanted to get in, they would. Too small to stand. Too tight to move much. I squeezed inside and pulled the door shut as quietly as I could. I stayed perfectly still. Instead, I heard movement downstairs. Slow. Careful. Not rushed. Not loud enough to be normal. At first I told myself it was just him grabbing food. Then maybe he was on the phone. Then maybe he dropped something. But the sounds didn't stop. They moved. And then I realized something that made my stomach feel hollow. My brother's car wasn't in the driveway. I got out of bed and went to the window, hoping I was wrong. Hoping I'd see headlights or the familiar outline of his beat-up car parked crooked like always. There was nothing. That's when fear stopped being a feeling and became a decision. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a way to call anyone without leaving my room. I checked my door, even though I already knew the lock meant nothing. It could be opened from the other side with a fingernail. I remember thinking, very clearly, that if someone wanted to get in, they would. The closet was the only place that felt even remotely safe. It wasn't really a closet, more like a crawl space built into the wall. Too small to stand. Too tight to move much. I squeezed inside and pulled the door shut as quietly as I could. I stayed perfectly still. I told myself I was being paranoid. That it was probably my brother. That maybe he parked somewhere else. That I'd laugh about this later. Then someone tried my bedroom door. The handle moved. The door opened. Whoever it was stepped into my room. I could hear them breathing. I could hear the floorboards creak under their weight as they moved closer, walking around my room like they belonged there. Things shifted. Something scraped across the floor. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep myself from making a sound. My heart was so loud I was sure they could hear it through the walls. I don't know how long they stayed. Time stretched until every second felt like a minute, and every minute felt like I might not survive it. Eventually, the footsteps moved away. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stayed in that closet long after my legs went numb, long after my throat hurt from swallowing fear, until I heard my brother's voice shouting my name from downstairs. Angry. Confused. Real. When he opened my door and saw me crawl out of the wall, the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. It hadn't been him. That night didn't end when the police came. It didn't end when my parents got home. It didn't end when the house was quiet again. Because once you learn how easily someone can be inside your room without your permission, that knowledge never leaves you. And that was only the first time. I wish I could say that experience made me safer. That it taught me lessons early enough to protect me later. But fear doesn't work like that. It doesn't give you armor. It just teaches you how to recognize the moment before everything goes wrong. And sometimes, recognition isn't enough to stop it. The second time I learned that, I was much younger. I don't remember my exact age, only that I was small enough for the kitchen counters to feel tall and the house to feel endless when the adults weren't home. Back then, I lived with my grandparents. It was a quiet town where doors stayed unlocked during the day and everyone waved when they passed each other on the street. I was raised on rules that only existed because people believed nothing bad ever really happened there. Don't talk to strangers. Don't open the door when you're alone. If something feels wrong, go find an adult. I followed those rules. Mostly. There was a man who lived nearby. He wasn't a stranger in the way adults warn you about. He knew my grandparents. He drank beers with my uncle. He helped haul firewood and fix trucks. I had seen him laugh in our yard, heard his voice in familiar conversations, watched him carry heavy things like he belonged there. That's the dangerous kind of familiar. The night it happened, my grandmother was out, and my grandfather had stepped out briefly to pick her up. I remember him asking if I wanted to go. I remember saying no because cartoons were more important than anything else in the world. He reminded me not to open the door. I promised I wouldn't. Minutes after his truck pulled away, someone knocked. I didn't hesitate. I ran to the door, asked who it was, and heard that familiar voice answer back. He said my grandparents weren't home. He said he knew. He said my uncle wasn't home either. Everything he said was true. That should have scared me. Instead, it convinced me. When I unlocked the door and pulled it open, he filled the doorway. He smelled like alcohol. His eyes didn't focus quite right. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. At first, nothing felt wrong. Not yet. Drunk adults weren't unusual to me. I had seen them laugh too loud, stumble, lean on walls. I told him he could wait in the kitchen. He didn't let go of my shoulders. I remember the moment his grip tightened. The exact second his voice changed. The way fear arrived without warning, like my body noticed something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. He dragged me into the kitchen. The knife came out of a drawer so fast I didn't understand what was happening until the cold pressure touched my stomach. He asked me questions I didn't understand. He said things I can't fully remember, only the way they made my chest hurt and my hands shake. When I cried, he told me to be quiet. He pressed the dull edge of the blade against my throat, slow and deliberate, like he wanted me to feel every second of it. I don't remember praying. I remember listening. I heard tires on gravel. Doors closing. My grandmother's voice. The relief hit so hard my legs nearly gave out, and I would have screamed if his hand hadn't covered my mouth. He turned us toward the doorway just as she walked in. The look on her face changed everything. I remember her scream. I remember my grandfather charging through the door like something feral had been unleashed inside him. I remember being shoved to the floor, then being pulled into my grandmother's arms as she blocked my view and told me I was safe over and over again. I still heard the struggle. I heard shouting. I heard furniture move. I heard the sound of bodies colliding. Then the door slammed. He was gone. No police came that night. No one talked about it afterward. Years later, I asked my grandmother about it again, expecting reassurance, closure, something that would make it make sense. Instead, she looked uncomfortable. She mentioned my grandfather leaving later that night. She couldn't explain why. I understood without her saying it. Some people handle monsters quietly. By the time I was older, that lesson was already burned into me. Danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks like someone you've seen 100 times before. By 15, I thought I understood fear well enough to manage it. I was wrong. That spring break, my parents were out of town, and the house was mine for the night. I wasn't nervous the way I had been when I was younger. I knew the routine. Lock the doors. Stay inside. Nothing bad ever happens when you're careful. Then my phone rang. The friend on the other end sounded wrong. Not drunk. Not joking. Desperate. He asked if I was home alone. He asked if someone could stay over. He didn't explain why. I said no. He begged. I caved for reasons that embarrass me now. Stupid reasons. Teenager reasons. Reasons that don't matter when you're standing in your kitchen watching someone reach for a knife. When the friend arrived, I could feel something was off immediately. His eyes didn't track right. His movements were too sharp, too sudden. He asked if the doors were locked. I told him they were. He asked me to check. That was the moment my instincts screamed loud enough that I finally listened. The way he smiled afterward wasn't relief. It was satisfaction. In the kitchen, he hovered near the drawer. I watched his hand move. I reacted before I had time to think, slamming the drawer shut and grabbing his wrist. He laughed. That laugh still lives in my head. The fear that hit me then was different. Cleaner. Sharper. The kind that doesn't panic, just plans. I got him outside. I locked the door. I called for help. Nothing happened because I noticed. Because I paid attention. Because I didn't assume I was safe just because I recognized the face in front of me. Later, I learned how close it really was. What he had been thinking. What he believed he needed to do. That knowledge changed something in me permanently. But even after all of that, even after learning to trust fear instead of ignoring it, there was one night that still stands above the rest. Because that time, I did everything right. And it still didn't matter. I was 10 years old, shooting baskets in the street, when I looked up and saw someone watching me from an upstairs window. I knew, instantly, that no one should have been there. When I ran inside and heard my name spoken from upstairs, something broke open inside me. I ran back out and called my mom. The police came. They found nothing. Everyone told me it was fine. That night, I learned how wrong adults can be. I woke up in the dark to the sound of movement in my room. I saw him standing there. Close enough that I could see the outline of his body against the faint light from the window. I screamed. He ran. And when my parents came in, the room was empty again. No one ever found him. I don't know how long he was in that house. I don't know how long he watched me. I don't know how many nights he might have stood there before I woke up. I only know this. Every time I hear a floorboard creak at night, my body remembers before my mind does. And somewhere deep down, I still believe that if I stay quiet long enough, maybe whatever is listening will move on. I used to think these moments were isolated. Bad luck. Coincidences stitched together by fear and memory. But as I got older, I realized something that made it harder to sleep than any single incident ever had. Every time I had been in real danger, there was no warning sound. No dramatic moment. No clear sign until it was already happening. It was always quiet first. After the man in my room escaped through the window, my parents tried to restore normalcy the way adults do when they're scared but don't want to admit it. New locks. Extra lights. A lot of reassurance that everything was fine now. I nodded. I said I understood. I even believed them during the day. At night, I listened. I learned the difference between the sound of a house settling and the sound of a footstep trying not to be heard. I learned how long silence could stretch before it became unbearable. I learned that fear doesn't always make you freeze. Sometimes it makes you hyper-aware in ways that feel almost supernatural. I grew up faster after that. By the time I was a teenager, I didn't sneak out. I didn't trust easily. I didn't put myself in situations where I didn't have an exit. Friends called me paranoid. Overcautious. Dramatic. None of them had ever heard their name spoken from inside a house they knew was empty. Years passed. Life moved on. College. Work. Relationships. Apartments with thin walls and neighbors close enough that sounds felt safer, more explainable. Then one night, years after everything else, something happened that finally made all the past pieces line up into one terrifying realization. I was alone in my apartment, scrolling on my phone, barely paying attention to the TV. It was late. Quiet. Safe in the way adulthood convinces you things are. I heard a noise behind me. Just once. A soft scrape. I froze. Not because I thought someone was there. Because my body reacted before my thoughts could. That same cold, sinking certainty bloomed in my chest. The same one I had felt in the closet. In the kitchen. In my childhood bedroom. I stood slowly and checked every room. Not because I thought someone was there. Because my body reacted before my thoughts could. That same cold, sinking certainty bloomed in my chest. The same one I had felt in the closet. In the kitchen. In my childhood bedroom. I stood slowly and checked every room. Nothing. No open doors. No unlocked windows. No signs of anyone else. I laughed it off. Told myself I was projecting old fears onto a harmless sound. That trauma echoes longer than danger ever does. Then I noticed something small. The bathroom mirror cabinet was open. I never leave it open. I stood there staring at it, my reflection looking older now, more tired, but with the same wide eyes I'd seen in the mirror as a kid brushing my teeth too fast. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. And that's what scared me most. Someone had been careful. I slept with the lights on that night. The next morning, I told myself it was stress. Imagination. Old memories clawing their way back up when I least expected them to. But I started paying attention again. Not obsessively. Quietly. And that's when I noticed patterns. The sound of footsteps in hallways that stopped when I did. The way doors sometimes felt heavier, like they'd been opened and closed too recently. The occasional feeling of being watched that came and went without explanation. I never caught anyone. And I think that's the point. Because the scariest thing I've learned isn't that bad people exist. It's that some of them are very good at leaving no evidence at all. I still don't know who broke into my house when I was 12. I don't know what happened to the man my grandfather drove away. I don't know where the voice from the upstairs came from, or where the man went when he escaped through my window. I don't know how close I came to not being here. What I do know is this. If you're alone and something feels wrong, trust it. If a sound doesn't belong, don't explain it away. If someone asks you to ignore your instincts, don't. Because sometimes, the only reason you survive is because you listened to a quiet voice inside you that said something wasn't right. And sometimes, the only reason nothing happened is because you noticed before it was too late. I still lock my doors every night. I still check my windows. And every once in a while, when the house is quiet and the lights are off, I swear I can hear someone moving carefully, just out of reach, waiting for the moment I stop paying attention. There's a moment that comes after fear, after adrenaline, after the shaking stops, where your mind starts trying to repair itself. It looks for logic. It builds explanations. It tells you stories that make survival feel earned instead of accidental. I spent years living in that space. I told myself I was just sensitive. That my brain had been wired wrong by childhood experiences. That hypervigilance was a scar, not a signal. Therapists gave it names. Friends gave it jokes. I learned how to smile when people said I worried too much. But none of that erased the feeling. Because the feeling never came out of nowhere. It always came right before something else did. I started keeping mental notes without realizing it. Not journaling. Not lists. Just impressions. Times when the air felt heavier. When rooms felt occupied even when they weren't. When silence didn't feel empty, just paused. I stopped inviting people over late at night. I stopped answering doors unless I was expecting someone. I stopped believing that familiarity meant safety. And then came the night that forced me to accept the truth I'd been avoiding. I had fallen asleep on the couch, TV still on, lights dimmed low. I woke up to the sound of the show's credits rolling, that empty music echoing through the room. I sat up, disoriented, the way you do when you wake up somewhere you didn't mean to fall asleep. That's when I realized the front door was unlocked. I stared at it for a long time. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. The habit was automatic, ingrained deeper than brushing my teeth. I walked over slowly and checked it anyway. Unlocked. No damage. No forced entry. No explanation. I locked it, checked every window, every room, every shadowed corner of the apartment. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I stood in my bedroom afterward, trying to calm my breathing, when I noticed something else. My closet door was open. Just a few inches. I don't use that closet often. It's mostly storage. Old boxes. Things I don't need but can't throw away. I keep it shut because it makes the room feel smaller when it's open. I stood there staring at that narrow gap, my chest tightening with a feeling I hadn't felt in years. I didn't open it. I backed out of the room, grabbed my keys, and left. I spent the night in my car, parked under a streetlight, watching my building like I expected someone to walk out at any second. No one did. The next day, everything was exactly the same. No signs. No proof. No answers. That's when it finally clicked. It wasn't one person. It was a pattern. I started replaying every incident in my head, not as isolated events, but as variations of the same situation. Being alone. Being trusted to be safe. Being watched. Someone entering quietly. Someone leaving without being caught. Always when I thought I had privacy. Always when I thought I was in control. I stopped assuming danger looked dramatic. I stopped assuming it would announce itself. I stopped believing that if something bad were happening, I'd know right away. Because I had known. Every time. I just didn't want to believe it. The hardest part to accept wasn't that these things happened. It was that there were probably more moments I never noticed. Times someone walked past my door while I slept. Times a window was tested and moved on from. Times I was watched and didn't feel it because I wasn't paying attention. People don't like hearing that. They want clean endings. Arrests. Confessions. Monsters unmasked and removed. They want fear to be something that resolves. But real fear doesn't end. It integrates. It becomes the reason you pause before opening a door. The reason you hesitate before trusting a voice. The reason you wake up sometimes with your heart racing and no memory of a dream. I don't live in constant terror. I live in awareness. And that awareness has kept me alive more than once. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The most dangerous moments in your life won't feel dramatic. They'll feel subtle. Slightly off. Easy to ignore. And the people who survive aren't always the strongest or the bravest. They're the ones who notice. They're the ones who don't convince themselves everything is fine just because admitting otherwise would be uncomfortable. They're the ones who listen when their instincts whisper instead of waiting until they scream. Because by then, it's usually too late. After that night in my apartment, I thought I had learned all I needed. I thought awareness was enough. But the reality is, trauma has layers, and some of them only peel back when you're forced into another moment that reminds you just how fragile safety really is. It happened again when I was 15, during spring break. My parents were out of town. I had the house alone. I thought I was safe, older, smarter, careful. I even remembered all the lessons. Locks, awareness, escape routes. I felt prepared. I wasn't. It started innocuously. My phone rang, a friend I rarely spoke to anymore, Mason. He sounded frantic, desperate even, asking if someone could stay over. I said no. He begged. Then he offered something, drugs, a favor, something stupid I let sway me, and I said yes. I let my judgment slip. When they arrived, I felt it immediately. Neil, my friend, was off. His movements jerky, his expressions strange, his tone too calm for what I sensed underneath. He asked about the doors, the locks, the windows. Each question a red flag that I noticed too late. I led him around, showing him everything was secure. He watched intently, scanning. He lingered near the knife drawer in the kitchen. I reacted instinctively, grabbing his wrist before he could pull one out. He didn't fight back. He laughed. That laugh, the sound still sits behind my eyes. The calmest, most unsettling laugh I've ever heard. I made him leave. I locked every door. I called my brother. He came over with friends. They got him out. I survived because I noticed. That night reinforced what I already knew: survival isn't about strength. It isn't about luck. It's about attention. But it also taught me something darker. Danger doesn't always need malice. It sometimes comes from minds too fragile, too fractured, too unbalanced to control impulses. The scariest people aren't the ones who plan attacks, they're the ones who act unpredictably, and the only reason you survive is that you're alert enough to react. By the time I turned 16, I was already hardened by experience. I no longer believed in coincidences. I no longer assumed familiarity meant safety. And yet, nothing prepared me for what came next. The night I saw him in the window. I was 10 at the time, yes, but the fear was different. I was alone in the yard, tossing a basketball, the sun warm on my back, and I noticed a shadow at my sister's window. My heart stopped. It was a silhouette, tall, still. I ran inside, checked the house, and called my mom. The police came, found nothing. They wrote reports. Nothing came of it. But that night marked the third lesson: some threats never leave, never get caught. Some people enter your life silently, move around your home, and vanish without explanation. The worst part isn't the encounter itself. It's knowing it could happen again, anywhere, anytime, without warning. The past and present collided as I got older. I realized a pattern: the terror I survived as a child didn't disappear. It evolved. It became a lens through which I saw the world. I could sense subtle threats, slight deviations in behavior, sounds that shouldn't exist. I learned to move silently, to anticipate, to never take my safety for granted. By now, the stories are numerous, the incidents overlapping. Houses I was left alone in. Friends whose behavior turned unpredictable. Shadows that appeared in empty rooms. The pattern was clear: danger rarely arrives announced. It's patient. It waits. It watches. And it always tests boundaries, the exact boundaries that seem safe, that seem untouchable, that are only illusions. I don't remember the exact number of times I was left alone. I don't recall all the intrusions or all the close calls. What matters is that I survived. That my awareness, my instincts, my refusal to ignore warning signs kept me alive. And I learned one final, devastating truth: the world doesn't protect you. People don't. Authorities sometimes don't. Safety is a construct, fragile and conditional. The only protection that ever truly worked was my own vigilance. My own refusal to assume nothing bad could happen. My own quiet, constant attention to what shouldn't be happening. I still live with that knowledge. I check doors, windows, locks, lights. I pay attention to sounds that seem small or insignificant. Shadows that flicker in my peripheral vision. The weight of a room changing as if someone has entered before I can see them. I've learned to sleep lightly, to move carefully, to trust instincts over appearances. I've learned that the worst predators aren't always obvious. That familiarity can hide danger. That silence can hide movement. That fear, when respected, can save your life. And even now, as an adult, I sometimes catch myself standing still in the dark, listening. Waiting. Knowing, deep down, that the most dangerous things aren't monsters in the movies, they're the ones you never see, the ones who slip inside while you think you're safe, and the ones who vanish just as quickly as they appeared. Because the truth is simple: life rarely gives you warnings. Danger rarely announces itself. And survival often comes down to noticing what most people ignore. And acting before it's too late. I remember that night as if the world had shrunk to the size of my apartment. Every sound became a signal, every shadow a possible threat. I wasn't sleeping on the couch anymore. I was awake, alert, aware of every subtle creak in the floorboards. It felt like the air itself had sharpened, pressing against my skin, testing my reactions. I had always believed that being observant was enough. That noticing, paying attention, would keep me safe. That night, I realized observation alone wasn't enough. Awareness without action is nothing. I was alone, the house dimly lit by the muted glow of the television, which I had left on to create background noise. Every second, I felt the walls close in a little. Then I heard it, a movement so subtle, I almost questioned it. A faint thump in the bedroom behind me, followed by the softest creak of a door. My stomach dropped. My eyes darted around, trying to locate the source. I froze, and instinctively, I started retracing every step I had taken that evening. Every lock I had checked. Every window I had closed. I realized, with a cold certainty, that someone had been inside, had moved through the apartment without leaving a trace. I remembered all the previous incidents, and for a moment, fear became more than just a memory, it became a living, breathing presence. It taught me something else, that survival is as much about timing as it is about awareness. The smallest hesitation, a single misstep, can be fatal. I moved silently to the hallway, counting each creak of the floorboard beneath me. Each sound felt amplified, like someone had placed microphones in every corner. And then I saw it, a faint shadow shifting at the edge of the living room. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I did what I had learned over years of fear and experience, I stayed calm. I watched, measured every move, and waited. The shadow didn't move like a human normally would. It was deliberate, almost mechanical, gliding across the room in a way that felt designed to intimidate without revealing itself. My pulse quickened. I realized this was not a prank, not a coincidence. This was calculated. I grabbed the first object I could use, a lamp, heavy enough to defend myself, and advanced slowly. My mind was racing, processing escape routes, possible threats, and contingencies. This was no longer imagination. This was reality. Then it shifted again. Closer. A presence so close that the hairs on my arms stood on end. My heart slammed against my chest, but I stayed silent. I could hear faint breathing now. Not mine. Someone else's. The world narrowed to sound, shadows, and instinct. Every lesson from my childhood came flooding back, the man in my grandparents' kitchen, the intruder in my room, the friend who had turned dangerous. Each one had prepared me for this moment, even if I hadn't realized it. Then, without warning, the figure darted past me. I followed instinctively, not thinking, just reacting. It ran through the apartment, disappearing around corners and through rooms as if it knew the layout better than I did. I chased it silently, every step precise, every sound muted. My body was tense, adrenaline sharpening every sense. I reached the bedroom door and froze. The shadow was gone. I checked every corner, every closet, every hiding place I knew. Nothing. The apartment was empty again. I sank to the floor, exhausted, trembling, aware of how close I had been to confronting something I couldn't predict, couldn't understand. The fear didn't leave. It stayed. It would never leave. That night, I understood something fundamental: danger doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to be obvious. The scariest things are subtle, quiet, and precise. They move like a thought you almost didn't notice, like a shadow at the corner of your eye that vanishes when you look directly at it. By morning, the terror had faded just enough for my mind to rationalize it. I told myself I had imagined it. That it was a trick of fatigue, shadows, or memory. But deep down, I knew better. And I knew this wasn't the last time. The world doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It doesn't give warnings, it doesn't pause for preparation, and it doesn't forgive mistakes. The only control you ever have is your vigilance, your instinct, and your ability to act when the moment comes. I realized something else, something terrifyingly simple: fear is not the enemy. Complacency is. Ignoring the subtle signals, assuming familiarity equals safety, and thinking that danger can't reach you, those are the true threats. And that night, for the first time in years, I felt it in a new way, the fragile truth that no amount of experience, no amount of vigilance, guarantees safety. The only certainty is that the world is capable of terrifying things, and the only defense is your own attention, your own instinct, and the willingness to act before it's too late. The next night, I couldn't sleep in my apartment. I left the lights off, sat on the edge of my bed, listening. The apartment was still, but it didn't feel empty. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the faint creak of the radiator, even my own breathing, seemed amplified. My mind played over every previous incident. The shadow in my sister's window, the man in my grandparents' kitchen, the intruder at 12. Each memory fed the current fear like fuel to fire. I got up and checked the locks again. All of them. I checked every window. Each one was secure. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. That someone, or something, was moving just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time became meaningless. I stayed alert, ready for anything, willing my instincts to carry me through the night. Then I heard it. A faint, deliberate tapping. Not the random settling of a building, not the whisper of the wind. Something soft, slow, and intentional, coming from the living room. I grabbed a chair. My breathing slowed as I advanced, every sense on high alert. I reached the doorway and froze. There it was. A shadow. Tall, unmoving, just beyond the edge of the light from the hallway. It didn't flinch, didn't move. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its presence radiated something predatory, calculated. I could feel its focus on me, like it had been observing my movements all night, waiting for me to make the wrong step. I took another step. It shifted. That was all it took to ignite every memory, every survival instinct I had learned over the years. I lunged, throwing the chair with all my strength. The shadow vanished. Not ran. Vanished. Like it had never been there. I froze, heart hammering, sweat cold on my skin. My apartment, so familiar, now felt alien. Every corner, every shadowed space, every room suddenly seemed full of potential threats. My past and present had collided. I realized something horrifying: no matter how vigilant I was, no matter how aware, the danger didn't need to announce itself. It could slip past me, unseen, undetected. I wasn't safe just because I was prepared. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor in the center of my apartment, listening, waiting, willing myself to stay alive by sheer attention. And for the first time, I accepted something I had avoided for years: that fear isn't just a feeling. It's a tool, a survival mechanism, and sometimes it's the only thing standing between life and disaster. By dawn, exhaustion finally overcame terror. I fell asleep sitting upright, still dressed, still alert. When I woke, nothing had changed. The apartment was empty. The shadows were gone. The intruder, if it had ever truly been there, had disappeared. But the lessons remained. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every flicker of light reminded me, danger does not give warning, and survival depends on noticing what others miss. That morning, I made a decision. I would never underestimate instinct again. I would never assume familiarity equals safety. I would never ignore the subtle signs that something is wrong. Because the world doesn't wait for you to feel ready, and it doesn't pause for mistakes. I still live with fear. I still live with the memory of shadows that shouldn't exist and intruders who vanished as if they were never there. But I also live with the knowledge that paying attention, listening to instinct, and acting decisively can be the difference between survival and something far worse. And the most important truth I've learned: no one else can protect you. Not friends, not family, not the authorities. Sometimes the only reason you survive is because you noticed, because you acted, because you refused to ignore the whisper that told you something was wrong. Fear doesn't fade. It sharpens. It teaches. It saves. And it will always be the one thing standing between me and whatever waits in the dark.